Hi. Well, we do have some feedback. Stand by. Um, Folks, we're trying something out new, and that's why we have some audio feedback. Let me fix that real quick. Hopefully I can fix it.
Definitely get us out of that multi-dimension we're hanging out in here.
Testing 1, 2. Testing. Boy, this is a little bit distraught. Why is there so many sounds? Okay, for those of you who don't know, why there's double sound. We are trying out a Discord. I guess you have Discord Clubhouse, and that's why in our Project Geospatial channel, do you hear feedback from me?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it is. It's definitely sounding a little ominous going on here. It's a little bit of a yeah. Exactly. I don't hear any coming from me. Do you hear feedback from me?
No, I do not.
Sound like an omnipotent, like.
No, that's probably because you have your headphones in.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, you definitely sound like, straight out of Wizard of Oz. So now I do.
Okay. Great. Hold on. Let me see if I can find my headphone. Stand by, everybody. Oh, why is that coming through there?
See, is it still doing it to me? Yeah.
How about now?
Better. Only me now.
Only you?
Yeah, I think you're fine.
Great.
It's okay. Wouldn't be a good Friday night without little technical issues. That's how we break the ice around here.
How about now? Do you hear me?
There's just a little bit of feedback, not bad, and I don't hear anything coming from my end.
Okay. Well, audience, if you're watching, if you hear any feedback from me, let me know, and I'll try to fix it. But I do hear a little bit still. I don't know what's going on. How about now? Testing 1, 2. All right.
It's a lot better.
We're just gonna a little better.
Yeah, it's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. I got to get this working. I'm trying to work two simultaneous systems for inputting audio at the same time and broadcasting out. So once again, I'm Adam Simmons. Once again with Courtney Miller. This is Late Night Geo, and we also get to experiment with new things on sometimes these late night things because we get a lot of fun, new setup, etc. So I'm trying to promote our Discord channel, which I'm trying to work on populating with more content. So by the way, Courtney, if we have any articles, I will start posting them into some of the channels in there. So every night, if you do geospatial research, we're going to post all those articles in there. So folks who watch the show, if you want to know where we get these articles and links, be a member of our Discord channel. That's exactly where we're going to post all this stuff. So, Courtney, you can become more familiar with it, and that's where you can dump all that good stuff too that we're going to talk about.
Awesome.
Sweet. Because I know I haven't been really good about putting all this in the show notes, but if people to incentivize me, I want to say join our Discord channel, become a member, and that's the way to do it. So that's what I'm trying to. That's a good little cycle there. Let's see. Late Night Geo, we usually bring on random people, so that hasn't happened for a while. But if you're curious about coming on the show, you can always PM us at Twitter at Project Geo Media on Twitter and message us. We're happy to bring you on during the live show, or just we'll schedule something one night and pop on and have a general discussion. So that'll be pretty cool. And we can talk about the latest trends or just talk about anything in geo. So pretty cool. We do have a couple things we have a lot of things to bring up tonight. I got a lot of article topics that you gave me, but I also brought up a couple myself this round. So we do have some interesting things to go over.
It's always nice when there's a lot going on during the week, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's quiet. Not this week. Not quiet this week.
Yeah. And I'm glad everybody got a chance to, right before the show when I went live, I got to see GeoCat. So GeoCat might end up being the new little mascot right before the show as everybody's waiting. So
yeah,
we'll
I think might get a sneak peek of GeoKid running in here too at some point. So.
GeoKid. At least the cat's sitting in the chairs, right?
The cat is going to behave better than GeoKid,
my director's chairs.
Yeah.
So let's see what we have here. I'm going to switch a couple screens over real quick so we can get started with tonight. Stand by. Wham. Okay, so we're just going to start off with this one because this is what I was looking at right before we hopped on. This is one you sent me. So this is a plan of Imola, Italy, canvas art print by Leonardo DiCaprio. This is, I guess, is coming from, which maps thread is this?
Yeah, this is from, I believe this is from just maps, like the subreddit maps.
Okay, subreddit maps.
Yeah, and awesome. So this one is neat because it is actually a iconographic map. It was basically like where Leonardo not DiCaprio.
DiCaprio. Welcome to the 90s.
Yes. Da Vinci was actually picturing this in his head. So he had to basically, we didn't obviously have access to aerial photography or anything like that in 1502. So this is more his mind mapping, essentially, trying to figure out what the particular, what it would look like in an overhead view of Imola, Italy. And then it's comparing it with the actual aerial view of what it looks like in the same area. And it's really pretty amazing how to scale and how well he did, considering that he did not have any major tools at his disposal. Obviously, we know about the genius of Leonardo da Vinci and his ability to really like move objects in his mind, and his spatial understanding is incredible.
Well, it's not to say he drew this all from scratch either. He probably walked around, did some measurements, walked around Italy, actually did measurements, paces, etc., like that.
You are reverbing.
But you're right. He didn't have balloons. Sorry, what?
Your feedback's pretty rough.
Oh boy. It's just on you. I don't think.
Okay.
Hopefully. This is why we need
if it's
audience.
Just on me,
you guys can chat. You can use the chat in any of your systems, YouTube or Discord or Twitch, and let me know how bad the feedback is, please.
Okay. So you're right. I'm sure he did use the tools that he had. If you don't have balloons or aerial view, he could have used step walking. He could have used just basic comparisons. But I just thought this was beautiful. So hats off to folks over at Maps on the subreddit Maps for bringing this up to kind of do a comparison point.
Yeah, I'm going to check out how bad my feedback is through the YouTube here on the side. Stand by.
Sometimes you just got to deal with it.
I don't think it's that bad. I think it's fine. I think it's just on your end just because we're talking on the Discord channel at the same time. So if you're okay with putting up with it, we'll just... I don't think it's that bad.
On your end
just because
I'll power through.
Discord channel at the same time. Go away, phone. Okay, there we go. Oops. I always like trying interesting stuff. Of course, that's where I get a lot of hiccups, and that's what happens. So a good example is I actually had Daryl on last night, and we did the Adam and Daryl show. It's been a while since we kicked that off, months, matter of fact. And we had Ron Birchoff, who's a True Weather at True Weather. And that episode you can watch it on Twitch on our archive channel as well as YouTube, but I'm going to clean up the intros, outros, and people can watch a more organized recording. We'll post that on our website within this weekend. So you all can check that out. But within that show, Daryl came over and we actually sat together, and we had, I had some mic issues because I had to work out the audio feedback from the speakers coming through the TV back into the microphone that's shared. So we actually had to share a Bluetooth headset so that the audio feedback wouldn't come through the speakers into the microphone. A little tricks of the trade that you have to figure. I know these things, but it's actually hard to implement physically unless you're kind of more prepared for them. So I just need to work on getting a splitter for some of my on-site activities. Little side note there for folks who don't do enough of this kind of thing on the side. Let's see. Yes, what you're saying about Leonardo DiCaprio. See, now you got me seeing DiCaprio. Leonardo da Vinci in 1502. What I was looking at comparing the imagery here, the imagery is definitely not perfect. So this is actually real how much this area in Italy has changed. For the most part, the buildings types seem to remain the same based off his drawing here. Well, somewhat, not maybe the bigger structures. But this whole area here is definitely matches this entire area surrounding. Actually, you know what? I'll have to do a little bit more comparison. I might take these two images and do an overlay on top of Google Earth or some other maps and just do like a little transparency layer and see how closely it matches. Because it's not a judgment on Leonardo da Vinci. It's more of a judgment on. It's more of a criticism on how much things have changed over time for that area. Mm-hmm. So that's all. So it's really kind of a fascinating there. But for the most part, yeah, really, really cool that he was able to map out the buildings, considering he didn't have aerial photography. He didn't have aerial balloons. He literally had to probably rock to an extent on top of the rooftops to get somewhat of a gauge of the area as well. So, I mean, you kind of you think from we'll call it ground survey perspective, how would you do this? So once again, the vast skill set of Leonardo da Vinci to do all this is fascinating. So we'll go down to this one here. This one I think is really interesting. This happened last week, I believe. I think that would be GeoKid, right?
That is, yes.
So I'm going to put you on mute for a second. I think I can do that. Can I do that? Yes, I can. As I talk about here, 2 black sky satellites lost on Rocket Lab launch failure. So this is actually a big deal for black sky. Let's see here. When exactly did this happen? I can't remember. So this is the article is dated May 15th. So it's been probably almost 2 weeks now. Regardless, the satellites did blow up on launch. It's a big deal because these satellites are not insured. And if for those who've been following one of the newer satellite providers like Black Sky, they're part of a bigger SPAC now. So you got to wonder what this could do to their investment portfolio or their valuation before they go public, perhaps later this summer. So really fascinating there, and seeing how this impacts their business. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe they have a certain amount of capital to account for such a loss. But it'll be fascinating to see how they adjust, especially with a lot of the newer satellite companies working off the whole SPAC setup. SPAC IPO setup that's been kind of the hot trend in the last year. So, go check that out. Of course, Rocket Lab has usually had a pretty good success rate. It just happens to be that it didn't work out this round. So, and this launch was out of New Zealand, looks like. Either way, unfortunate, but hey, space is hard, as someone said recently. Ask Elon Musk, right? But they work off their failures pretty well too. So failure is opportunity to learn if you have the money to do so. So the next topic we're going to move on to, well, those are some of these are some of Courtney's topics moving forward, but we're going to jump around a little bit. Introducing Gaia, artificial intelligence and planetary scale environmental management. So this is an interesting article, and it talks about, it's really more philosophical. And Courtney, do you want to talk about this article right here? This is your article that you brought up, introducing Gaia, the artificial intelligence planetary scale environmental management.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic to me because I think it's really starting to pop up a ton. And we've talked about this topic, I think at length on LateNightGeo, is about what do we do about the capacity for geospatial monitoring to help how we deal with like conservation and sustainability and climate change. And the big question, of course, is like, well, yeah, we can monitor a lot of things, but one, how we standardize it. what does that mean? How do we kind of keep things, how do we keep track of things, and how do we monitor what it all means? What are the measurements, and how do we use that to enact policy? And what I like about this particular article is that the author, which is Dave Tao, is really trying to say, like, hey, we need to have a conversation, an uncomfortable conversation about what it means to have a global kind of monitoring system, because right now so much is left up to the countries, or you have like maybe the UN, or you have individual countries. And his point is basically like, can we start looking at different models that allow for some more like democratization of how that we monitor things, and ways that we do it without going immediately into a mass, like global standardized way of planetary scale environmental management? Are there different ways and models that we can do it? Like versus having like one singular way that we monitor the climate change on Earth, are there other ways we can do it? And I think this is just a really interesting and important conversation. So I think it's a great article to check out just to start the conversation, because it's coming up like nearly every week is ways in which that we can monitor climate change through geospatial technology and imagery. But what does it mean? How do we use it to apply it to policy? And then what if people do say, like, why don't we have a standardized system? We're seeing later in the show, we'll talk a little bit about what NASA is doing in terms of sort of an Earth, sort of a management system, sort of a planetary management system. So a really important conversation, and he uses it specifically to talk about what AI can do in order to help monitor this. So, what does that mean in order to use artificial intelligence in order to take this massive amounts of data and be able to catalog it and make predictions, and again, to feed into policy. And it's an important conversation, and one that absolutely the geospatial industry should be spearheading.
I find it interesting looking at, I'm looking at some of the things he's referencing here, and I think they're kind of a stretch really for what he's kind of generically referencing folks attempt. He's confusing data aggregators as a way of planetary of doing planetary monitoring management. For example, Esri's Living Atlas of the World. I'm not quite sure I would maybe it's planetary monitoring, but they're curated data sources that come in. And actually in the military or the defense community, we commonly know this as common operating pictures. Basically, if you ever see those spy movies, we get all the individuals lined up in computers in these massive big rooms. And you got these giant TVs with these kind of global maps of stuff happening and popping up everywhere. And usually those screens are populated by individual reports that are happening and submitted from these reporting databases. And this is exactly what things like Esri's Living Atlas of the World is. Now, some of these other ones like Amazon Earth on AWS, this is really more of a aggregated database of submitted data sources from different places. But I'd argue that to get a massive planetary monitoring and management system, it's not just about creating a common operating picture. You have to define what this thing is not just monitoring, but how you're going to manage it and what those things are actually going to do. And actually those things are going to impact down the road. It's like, okay, so what? This is displaying this, but when this happens, what system is this going to tell that this activity happened? Is like, hey, there's a storm in this area. Okay, is the AI automatically going to tell these agricultural systems to kind of take a break for a while and go under shelter while the tornado goes to the area? Stuff like that. The items that he referenced, I think he makes an interesting attempt to point to specific areas that people are aggregating data. But once again, these are not what I would consider planetary monitoring management systems, but more an aggregation of data, which is actually needed too. We need to start aggregating data catalogs, and people have been doing it in their various iterations over the last 10 or 20 years, really. Actually, ever since we're gathering data, there's always these little silos of data repositories everywhere. And And these are just small examples of people's attempt to grab lots of data and put into single places. But that's only a first step. You still got to define and combine and correlate what those data sources are actually going to do within either machine learning or AI, or what other systems are going to talk to across industry. And I would say that that's where things just kind of scatter and break up, and people needed to find the actual system functions more than the systems themselves. It's a massive architectural challenge, and I think we'll get to some degree down the road. But I would say, if I'm going to put a prediction on Project Geospatial, I would say doing a planetary monitoring management system that's going to interact with multiple governments from an AI approach. I'd still say we're probably 30 or 40 years away.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying and what he is saying is that we need to look past just data collection into the next step. The next step is scary. It's uncomfortable. It brings up a lot of political questions, but we need to start having it. And I think that's really key. And unfortunately, a lot of times when it comes to this type of thing, it is going to be private industry or other folks outside of governments that make the call.
Oh, excuse me. No, it's still a very, very manual process. And the more our machine learning and AI functions that we're developing are wrapped around influencing humans' decisions or assisting human decisions, this is still going to be somewhat of a pipe dream in terms of it's going to inform people, but it's not going to manage systems on its own. And I think that's the difference between a, what you got Elon Musk or the Teslas with assisted driving capabilities, or a completely automated car, for example.
Yeah, and I think it's now is where we start having the conversation, because we don't want to start having the conversation when we have to have it. When we're like, oh, Florida's underwater. We need to start having the conversation about, certain aspects of climate change. Now is the time we start having the ethical questions about what do we do if we have to make these very real judgments in real time and leave it up to something outside of us, very imperfect humans. So I don't know. It's an interesting take, and I'm glad that we're having the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I would actually probably go back. It would be interesting to have this author on, because once again, I would kind of help him redefine. These are your data repositories. I wouldn't say these are industry examples of what he's talking about. There actually are industry examples of what he's talking about, but these definitely, I would say, are not necessarily them. So, all right, we'll go on to the next topic here on the, okay, what we got here, map chat, how land is used in the United States. Okay, well, this is an interesting map.
Yeah, so this is just one, again, I found this on Data's Beautiful off in Reddit. I think it might have been in Maps, but I think it was Data's Beautiful. But it came originally from MapStack. It's pulling out what are the land uses currently in the United States, kind of this nice little, it almost looks like a little 8 or 16-bit representation, but I typically don't see it laid out like this. Excuse me. Excuse me. It's late for Geo Mom here.
Really? It's late.
I know it's 1 hour earlier here.
It's now flipping over to be 9 o'clock in St. Louis.
Yes,
10 o'clock in Eastern time. Oh, by the way, LateNightGeo goes all the way to midnight, Courtney, on a good night.
Oh, yes.
Oh, maybe we should move to midnight St. Louis time and add an extra hour there.
Yeah, just really, really torture me here. So basically, that one thing is very interesting is that how much of the land use is up for cow pasture and range. And that's one that we don't typically think about, and other husbandry. So there's a huge portion of what the land in the U.S. is left for cow pasture and range. And there's a lot of it that goes to livestock feed. That's a big chunk right there. And interesting is timberland. There's a big portion of the U.S. that is both private family, federal, corporate, different versions. And you can see the different commodities that we treat, different commodities that we raise and or grow here in the U.S. And comparatively, you look at things like it even has like state parks and national parks and wilderness and airports, railroads, and it comes down to, and I particularly like how they have the 100 largest landowning families. It's just all Florida, pretty much. But it comes down to, then way over on the East Coast is what is left over for rural, urban, and urban housing and urban commercial. So it's really interesting. I mean, it really shows how little of the U.S. is actually dedicated towards housing or commercial space. How much of it is to raising animals and animal husbandry. I just think this is a really brilliant map. It's a great representation. Really helps people understand it. So big props to I think it says originally it was created by Bloomberg writers Dave Merrill and Lauren Leatherby. And the authors of the post says they don't know whether that was the actual authors or creators of the map, but they originally brought it to attention in 2018. And it's neat. Everyone should know how we lay out the land in the U.S.
I would be really fascinated to see this map as a change over time. This is a snapshot, but see these move, because you obviously see, I'm today's day and age, how small tobacco is. I'm sure this is somewhere this is in Virginia right there, but I'm sure this used to cover a large swath of this, 100 years ago, as well as what the changes with other areas, right?
Yeah.
So this is a very, very fascinating map. Christmas trees, apparently somewhere in Georgia down there. Christmas trees are this is where we get our Christmas trees. Georgia, probably Georgia pines.
Little maple syrup, a little like fresh flowers. I mean, it really is a brilliant
maple
map.
Syrup. Isn't that a northern thing, Canada?
No, there is plenty of maple syrup that is produced here in the U.S. Vermont, Wisconsin, up in northern Midwest. Northern hey to the northern Midwest. Even in Missouri, we have maple syrup. So next time you enjoy your pancakes and waffles, you can thank
dip down here
your northern rural states for that. Huh?
Northern Midwestern.
Yes, exactly.
So let's see. Rural highways. That's an interesting one. Mm-hmm. Lots of rural highways in Texas, I guess. Railroads. Boy, I have to keep that in mind. That's really fascinating, actually. I wonder if this has to do with crossing into Mexico or railroads as a bigger distribution point across the country here. You would think railroads with the transcontinental years ago would have been somewhere near Denver or Wyoming.
Well, and I think too, by the way, I have no idea what Weyerhaeuser is. I'm sure that's something I can look up, but it's a little nebulous. It is this large area that I don't know what it is, but the wildfires are interesting too. That's a pretty large chunk. It's more than corn syrup and I would
Weyerhaeuser Company is an American timberland company which owns nearly 12,400,000 acres of timberlands. So it's a private company who owns a significant chunk of land in that part of the U.S.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And the
private
family timberland.
They own a lot of land in the in Canada especially, but their headquarters out of Seattle apparently.
Well, and if you look at the 100 largest landowning families, that space looks pretty comparable to, if not larger than, urban housing.
But just to be a company, this is the only company listed on this entire map here. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Quick little survey here. It looks like that's fascinating. It's the only company actually listed here.
Yeah.
For area. Well, that's impressive.
I agree that an overtime map would be a time-lapse map would be really amazing. So get on that map, folks. Make it.
Well, actually, we should probably look up who made this and perhaps send them an invite. Bring them on the show.
Yeah.
Do a little deeper dive into data. All right. Moving on to the next one here is talking about Starlink. What's going on with Starlink? Starlink version 1.0 L28 mission completes first shell of satellites for worldwide coverage. Well, that's significant because they've been launching for quite a long time, and they got, let's see, how many So May 26th, they lifted off with 60 Starlink satellites.
So there's over 1,600 right now.
Yeah, and that's what they consider their first shell. Oh my gosh. That's a lot for global coverage.
Well, they say that they should be within operation orbit within the next few months. So I know that there was some talk about doing like you could sign up for beta testing and some different components.
Yes. And I think beta testing is not it's actually not too expensive. I think for 150 megs, the Starlink satellite is, let's see where, if I get this correctly. Okay. Starlink users currently pay $99 a month for a subscription to the service, which is in beta, plus $500 for the physical kit for installation, which includes a router, tripod, and satellite dish. And I'm pretty sure they're trying to advertise 150 megabytes for the bandwidth, which is actually pretty good. Not too bad, especially for a rural connection. That's really good.
Yeah, and it's better than a lot of like hotels will offer, things like that. So it's, or even some businesses, and or in a high bandwidth area if you're in an urban or suburban area with high bandwidth draw, But I think the neat part is, even in the beta testing, that cost is not crazy when you consider that once things really get rocking and rolling and they can start dropping the costs. It's definitely feasible that we can be, 100% satellite covered for internet within the next few years, I believe. And so,
it'll actually feasibly. Actually, there's a lot of discussion on those. I'm looking up in a generic Google. As Gizmodo, for example, has an article that says Starlink versus 5G, which will be the better home for internet service. And people got to realize, 5G is actually, pretty comparable. If you have 5G, you probably don't need Starlink, especially as you can get a 5G internet connection, for T-Mobile for probably anywhere between it's not just T-Mobile, or Google Fi between, 30 and 50 bucks a month. And that's pretty cheap considering it's $99 or 150 megabytes download, which is pretty comparable to 5G. What people have to realize is this isn't necessarily for the folks who have access to 5G or 5G. If 5G is not accessible in your area, keep in mind that Starlink is a global coverage. So there's a lot of areas of the world, including ship traffic. And you think about even internet on planes that I'm not sure how it'll work with internet on planes, to be honest, but it could be feasible. That you're giving access. Think about rural areas and other continents, Africa, South America, Absolutely. Asia, and everywhere else. So articles like that are interesting, but I think that they're missing the point. You're actually giving internet access to a whole demographic that either had a very, very slow connection or previously didn't even have access to it before.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's a movement in the right direction in terms of getting more and more access to internet, which is still, it's even in areas where it's available, it's not always accessible to a lot of families, and we're moving in the direction of basically like universal capacity. So excited to see the progress, and we'll see how it goes. I think a few weeks or a few months ago, we had a map of what the Starlink constellation looked like compared to a lot of the other satellites, and it was this neat little bar of the shell, as they call it. So looking forward to ongoing updates coming from Starlink. So congrats on getting your first shell up in the air.
Absolutely. I was trying to, this is the Tintin A and B Starlink test satellites prior to launch. And I'm actually tempted to figure out, because you don't get a really good sense of scale here, how big or small these things are. And if you're launching as many as you're launching, I imagine they're not that big, but this one actually looks really big. This probably looks almost like the size of a person. So I'm really curious to know how big these things actually are. Huh. Interesting. Either way, moving on to the next topic. That's really fascinating. If you talk about geospatial applications here, not only we have to watch out for deconflicting for launching more satellites, because there's going to be so many more up in the air, but this also has a lot of applicability when we're looking and crossing into things like, we're doing satellite internet communications. and perhaps communicating with things like even drones globally as well, so that drones may no longer be a thing that you just communicate or fly through Wi-Fi. Perhaps maybe you can fly and touch base with your drone through your Starlink connection, but that's just a thought. We'll see if the latency is good enough for that. So we're going to move on to the next topic here and see where I read. Okay, blurry satellites images of Palestine and Israel make rebuilding harder. So digital researchers and aid groups say free mapping tools like Google Earth are too imprecise. Well, no kidding. I don't think these digital researchers, I think these digital researchers keep looking for the free solution. Google Earth is a great reference for a lot of different things, but if you're looking for damage assessment that's more current and live, I would actually say right away that you're probably going to have to order the imagery, because even Google Earth isn't designed to get the imagery or update the data from a day-by-day basis of activity going on the ground. So just the title alone kind of gives a connotation. It's like, what are these data researchers thinking?
So what is the reason why that, like, this, they talked about this is coming from, who is it? Like some of the folks at, let's see, was it the International Committee of the Red Cross? You know, why don't they have access to some of the some of the better imagery that you would think, like, how does do they not know about it? Are they not connected to some of the better providers?
No, it has to do with updates. It's purpose, right? Google Earth, first of all, Google Earth is a nice tool, nice to have. It's not, I'm really happy Google is keeping that application, Google Earth, and as well as Google Earth for the web, still alive, just for the sake of education and awareness of people just exploring the globe through imagery, and for a lot of different things. You got Google Earth for good, and a lot of things happening with Earth Engine and the interesting projects out of Google that I know Rebecca, is it Rebecca? I'm going to say Rebecca Moore, but I want to say I'm getting that wrong. Rebecca Moore. That's a musician. It is. It is Rebecca Moore. Yeah, she's a software engineer. That's right. She does Google Earth Outreach and Google Earth Engine. Anyway, those are unique projects. But you understand that Google acquires this imagery. It's not Google's imagery, and so they have limited use of what they can apply it to. Applying it to Google Maps and as a reference for people who are trying to navigate is one thing. Those are snapshots in time that they can update, and usually update where people are the most, your major urban areas. And the more urban you are, you want to keep those more updated. And the more rural, you don't need to update them as much. But keeping track of where people drive the most. But they usually purchase imagery, and I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but they'll purchase imagery from companies like Maxar, Airbus, and a few other companies to populate their databases. So when people is like, oh, I'm going to compare, this article is attempting to compare planet imagery, and they say with Google Earth, but really what they're actually comparing is likely, I can't believe they label, this is mislabeled. It's not Google, doesn't have this attribution. If they actually look in the bottom right hand corner, we're looking at Google Earth. It's actually comparing probably planet with Maxar imagery or Digital Globe or Airbus. And those images get updated within Google's databases on a periodic purchase plan. Usually either, I think at the max I've seen for major areas is annually, but as little as a couple weeks at a time too. And if you really want to kind of test that out in certain areas, you can go into the Google Earth thick client application, the one available for download, not the web. You can click on the timescale option. You can see within a certain area what images are available for certain spots. And there are actually better applications that kind of assess that time stack and the coverage area. And it's a really, really fascinating thing there. But once again, that application isn't designed to help out specifically aid groups or things that happen from an event standpoint globally. Crisis situations, for example, it's a good reference, but it is not designed to help with events that happen daily. So risk. It is an interesting article from a debate, and I think this article is really more highlighting a misunderstanding of what Google Earth's providing as so. Man, this is like tearing. This is really more tearing Google Earth apart and giving Planet a lot of credit for the area. So, so the and that's I think that's a so if people want to give Planet more credit, I'd be like, okay, well, where's Planet's version of their global base layer that they're providing to the public? And they're not. You have to buy their imagery. You can't just go to Planet's website and see where's my planetary, Planet's version of a Google Earth, and they, maybe they should provide one. Maybe they see what happens. Maybe they should provide. But I can tell you what they're going to do is they're going to provide you with a archived imagery version of that base map if they do, because they make money off of selling imagery. They're not going to just give that away for free.
Yeah, it's an interesting it's kind of an interesting what every article has its purpose. So in this one, it's pretty much like it is shaming Google a little bit for its imagery, but to what end?
Because even Maxar, you can do the same thing with Maxar. I would say it's more accurately, you should say Planet versus Maxar, because because Planet Labs has a 0.5 meter resolution, but it's not. Okay, so there are some policy things at the same time. So you got to see if Maxar is allowed or allowing Google to get imagery of Palestine or Israel because of the policies that are in place by the U.S. government for distribution of certain imagery. Now, I'm not sure, because both companies are a U.S. company, what restrictions are actually in place. I'd have to do my research. But there were kind of restrictions on giving out resolution. High resolution imagery of Palestine and Israel in general. And
I think an underlying reason that they might be pushing this to authors is to discuss how that you have an incredible, it's sort of putting some public and humanitarian pressure on imagery providers like Planet Labs or Maxar, and saying, hey, you should be providing more up-to-date imagery to these humanitarian organizations in order to help with their cause, because Google Earth just can't cut the mustard when it comes to bringing the most. And I think that's kind of an underlying hint that they're giving. Now, whether or not that's the right way to go about it in terms of,
I would probably compare Planet with Maxar, not Planet with Google, unless you're trying to say what the difference is between a paid version and a free version is.
I think,
but I wouldn't quite have used Planet, and the reason probably they used Planet is because it was probably the cheapest version they had available, especially as they read here that Bellingcat sometimes uses a subscription service like Planet, because Maxar has a resolution of 0.3 meter or lower. It's like twice as good as Planet's. Actually, arguably, it's 4 times as good as Planet's, because a lot of the Planet's best imagery doesn't cover global. So
yeah, I think it's an interesting, it might be a case of media activism, but it's through Wired, so it's a major media source. I think that it draws an interesting question about again, democratization of certain tools that are privately owned, but have some public good applications. But again, just an interesting conversation to have when it comes to these major crises, like what's going on between Israel and Palestine.
So while I don't think this is right. While U.S. regulations now permit a resolution of up to 0.4 meters per pixel, free mapping tools have remained at old. No. This is not accurate at all. U.S. resolutions permit actually down to I believe 0.3 or 0.25 meters. Much further below this. Somebody's not doing their research right. No, I'm still good. Now, where he is right is, look, actually, there is a huge, and I can't remember the name of the capability, is there is a service out there for media. There was actually a few, media has a ref, media and definitely nonprofit organizations trying to create more like watchdog groups of different countries. They do have a ref. Imagery is very, very expensive. They don't have a lot of money to pay for it. There's no really great platform anymore. And I think there was one that helped aggregate a lot of the imagery and gave it out to approved or validated media organizations or nonprofit organizations, specifically NGOs that helped with certain situations. The business model for imagery providers is not set up right. The older the imagery is, the cheaper it is. And that's why I say if Planet ever does come out with a global base layer or a free version of their own for like Google Earth, it'll likely be an imagery base layer that's anywhere between 1 and 5 years old, or perhaps even older, because there's no value in it for them. So, and that's the problem. How do you convince? What's the value added for an imagery provider providing these services? And you're like, well, maybe they have a obligation. It's like, well, you can say the same thing to a food company like maybe General Mills and saying, well, don't you have an obligation to give food to the poor or the needy? I'm like, well,
and that is an interesting point though, because most major food providers do have some sort of like supporting hunger or other type of thing. And that's where I think this is interesting is looking at corporate responsibility practices. There is ways to put pressure on private organizations in directions to have them, for the common good. Now, whether or not this is a direction we want to be pushing private imagery, providers, I don't know. That's up for discussion. But I think that's the reason why the author is pushing it in this direction. And, for better, for worse, I think that's what they're trying to hint at.
Well, and that's a good concept to have from a debate. I think it's a really good debate to have because there's this bottom here comes down to community satellites, which is an interesting concept too. Now, who pays for the satellites? Is it nonprofit that kicks up funding and donations to actually pay for a satellite, but that satellite has to needs funding to maintain itself and maintain operations and people to actually maintain the downlink, the software, to access the imagery. Where's the imagery going to go? The data stores, etc. Who's going to maintain it all? And it's not just building it and launching it. So there's actually a lot of public satellites as well, like Landsat and Sentinel out there, but those are very, very low resolution satellites, even though they're daily and freely available to everybody. Those are very low resolution, but those are also taxpayer provided. So what does it mean to be a community satellite and who's going to provide that? Now, however, if everybody's willing to give Project Geospatial funding, I'd be happy to put a satellite up in the air. I'd love to have our own satellite. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah. No, we'll pop up a constellation and make it happen. I'll make it a community constellation. We'll have a Project Geospatial's version of Google Earth. That'd be kick-ass. So now they got me thinking. I'll do it. I'll do it. Come on.
It's
Come on,
becoming
folks.
a lot cheaper. Only needs like what, $1 million or something.
Oh, no, they're cheaper than that for small sats, but you just got to get the fun. So the problem is, how do you get? What do you do? Kickstart
how we shoot
that?
It up there?
Well. So we can go over the numbers in a future episode, but it's not just about building the satellite, but how much do you need to get this thing on a launch? And maybe from a nonprofit standpoint, you convince the launch providers like, oh yeah, we're a nonprofit, so you can write us off as a tax deductible or something like that. I have no idea. But maybe there's a way to do it. You got to think about how the is it National Science Foundation? Who did what's Bill Nye's nonprofit?
I do not know that.
He does. I thought it was a National Science Foundation. No, it's a Planetary Society. So one of the cool things they did was, as a nonprofit organization, then the Planetary Society, is they launched their version of a solar sail to test that out. It was one of Carl Sagan's original concepts well, it wasn't his per se, but he was one of his objectives for the organization to get one of these things up in the air, up in space, and test out the concept of a solar sail. And the Planetary Society was able to completely fund that through donations and get that thing launched and operational. But it's a major endeavor as a nonprofit to do that. But it's impressive. But you can just totally give back. How do you, once again, how do you maintain it? How do you continuously get funding for it? So it's not just give me a Kickstarter, give me $1 million, and we'll launch one up in the air. Then what? So I don't want it to be a dead satellite after 6 months when when the funding goes away. So, and then does it still cost money? When we provide the imagery, like, hey, do we become a Wikipedia big for money every year just to keep it up alive?
I would think this is when you would need like Reddit or something to get behind you, and like Reddit needs to do its own free,
Reddit, get Reddit, man. This is to get the geospatial community involved. If these, look, I know these folks, these NGOs don't have a lot of money. I know the aid organizations don't have a lot of money, but provide perhaps getting together and figuring out what the community actually needs to solve their objectives. If they want to have a planet version, a free version community satellite constellation, let's figure that out. And allocate certain budget towards putting that together and creating a conglomerate, a partnership, and making that work. But I don't think we can, I think relying on a company to do that for you, there's a lot of flaws because they can easily take that away from investor relations and public, just who they answer to, the stakeholders. But having a nonprofit organization do it, I think there's a lot of accountability that to the public that they can perform. So I actually like looking at the Planetary Society as a good benchmark. Good best practice on how potentially it can be done. So that's a good article. It's good, definitely good discussion topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Let's see here. What do we got here? That's the imagery example. Satellites may have been underestimating the planet's warming for decades. Well,
yeah, this one is just a quick little interesting article that basically I'll give like the real quick overlay is that one, thermal imagery does not tell a full picture of global warming. They also need to include moisture. So basically the best way to figure out the most accurate predictions of climate change is not just looking at thermal imagery. It's also looking at, now I don't know if this exists. This is why I put this in the question earlier, was moisture. Can you track moisture levels from satellite imagery? And or some version of, they're basically saying you need the two combined in order to really get a full picture of things. If you're only doing one or the other, you're missing out.
There's this. It's funny. We just had an interesting individual on last night. I was when Adam and Daryl View the World. Don Birchoff. And he's basically like a weather guy. He takes in weather data to help with a lot of different projects, and he would actually be a good individual to talk to about this topic. And because I'm not going to pretend to I know a lot of things about just weather phenomenon in general, but I do know from looking at a lot of weather data in the past using things like IR and multispectral imagery that yes, you can pick up a certain degree of figuring out, yes, there's moisture in the air. You can detect that. Measuring it, on the other hand, I know they're capable of it. I just don't know to what extent. And then what if I found fascinating and I didn't completely realize is what Don was talking about last night is you can, from the top down, from satellite view down, you can detect and see things and measure things, but that has its limitations from the top down, where I believe he threw out the number, I think 5,000 feet or below is this kind of dark zone where there's not a lot of, there's not sensors set up to measure things from a certain ceiling and below. So really our weather is designed to look at major storms, major systems going through, but anything that looks at things like drones or helicopters or things that are flying low, micro bursts of weather, you can't really, we don't have the sensor set up to say, because really it's about risk, and there's not enough risk incurred from an economic standpoint to have made that viable for us to solve. Of course, he says differently, and he actually makes a valid point on why that's more important than ever, especially with the changes in technology, how drone delivery is a big deal, and other systems that are being employed from a low altitude setup. So the answer is, I'm pretty sure you can measure a lot of this stuff from the satellites, but to what extent, I have no idea. So the measure of the temperature of what it was, the planet's warming accurately, I would say just to do it based off of the weather alone or what you see from above, I would say is I would say that's a very accurate statement, because we're not, you have to combine what you're looking at and measuring from the ground also, and actually within the earth. What's the ground temperature? What's the, what do we understand below the clouds?
Yeah, I think that was basically what they're saying is, and like I said, we're hitting on a lot more and more, is that we're going to need multifactorial decision making when it comes to really getting a full picture. And that means a lot of cooperation amongst different data sources. And it gets complicated, but that doesn't mean that it's not doable.
No, not at all. Let's see. And I believe we're getting to the topic that you referenced at the beginning of the evening, which gets into NASA. So tell me what's going on with NASA's Earth System Observatory.
Yeah, actually, I was curious about this one because I will fully admit, I'm not sure what this means exactly. So I'm hoping that between the two of us, we can figure it out. But basically the Biden administration has announced that they are going to put up a series of 5 Earth science satellite missions over the next decade, a $2.5 billion program they're calling the Earth System Observatory, to collect climate and geological data, which is, obviously a major platform in terms of curbing climate change. And so one of the things that is interesting about this is that, again, it's that same sort of idea of we're monitoring what's going on the Earth in terms of climate change outcomes and variables. What do you do with it, and how do you interpret the data? And I think that there's a lot of data that's going to come from this particular effort. And the question is, what do we do with it? How do we process it? How do we, what different type of AI or ML, applications and platforms do we do in order to make it understandable? But I think that they mention in the article some of the different types of things that they'll be looking at: aerosols, cloud convection and precipitation, mass change, surface biology, geography, surface deformation and change. So lots of different fun stuff that they'll be looking at over time. But again, we're certainly not the only country that are starting to really look at ways of monitoring what's going on in terms of climate change. So how do we pull it all together, and how do we really think about ways to coalesce all this information to make real, because we don't, as much as we think that we operate as independent entities, we all affect one another. So while it's great that the US is doing this and that we're starting to pay attention to data and climate change in a very real and predictable way, still going to be interested to see how we can apply that to a larger grand scale. How do we affect real change once we have the data in our hands, basically?
Yeah, so it looks like the article is talking about launching a SAR, or a constellation, or synthetic aperture radar constellation, to monitor things like changes in the Earth's surface smaller than a half an inch or 1 centimeter. So in a lot of ways, this has a lot of overlap, from what I understand, that the Airbus's Tandem X or Terrasar X constellation kind of does. I have to kind of compare the resolutions. Maybe it's not to this extent, but you're also talking about producing and measuring. We're talking finite changes in the Earth, like a global DEM, for example. It's a digital elevation model of the Earth, and the more you take a snapshot of an accurate picture of the entire terrain of the Earth, the more you understand how each, because it's not just the tectonic plates. Every piece of the Earth actually moves to an extent that people don't even realize. Talking about erosion and especially all kinds of things. Even man, I got like a million images in my head right now about how the Earth is literally moving around in different aspects. Talking about water, rivers changing. So you just
much, yeah.
Yeah, so much, and having a DEM that perhaps it'd be kind of interesting to see what the revisit rate they're trying to do is, but the half inch, half meter, was it meter? Did I say half meter? I believe it was half meter. Yeah, the half inch or 1 centimeter perspective. I definitely would love to compare that with Airbus's Terrasar and Tandem X constellation, because that was a really big thing 5 or 6 years ago when they first launched their constellation to make the most accurate digital elevation model that existed out there. And the thing is, that was a really expensive thing, so not everybody can take advantage of that. So having the government do it, perhaps provide a free available resource to do it and track it, it kind of goes back to that whole community aspect to providing. But what does that do for companies out there? Now, Airbus is at least that aspect of it is. Actually, I'm not even sure if Airbus. I have to, but anyway, what would that do to their business model if our government decided to offer that freely, or will they offer it freely? I'm not sure.
My guess is no.
Well,
unless there's pressure that's put on them. I think that it's while we'll use it for climate change, I think there'll probably be a defense aspect and national security aspect of it.
Maybe, but now when NASA's doing it and they're working with others,
that's where we start putting our bets. We start putting up on the wall.
But that's what Landsat. So I know Landsat is active right now, and Landsat's a freely available government satellite. So you can go you can really pull down Landsat data right now. It's just not that high of resolution, but they use it for monitor things like agriculture and things like deforestation, big ticket items, even forest fires. So it's not that. So it will be interesting to see if they do give it freely. I think it's actually on the table. I don't think it's unlikely. I think it's just debate how competitive is what the government's trying to do here with businesses doing the same thing. And if it's just one business, does it even matter? And I guess is it for the betterment that they release this, because it would, from a technological innovation standpoint, spur more companies to take advantage of a resource like this to do even more, instigate a new economy around such a capability. Because once again, the barrier to entry for acquiring a global DEM from Airbus or a SAR company, because if everybody doesn't realize, SAR imagery is super expensive. It's like anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 per a new tasking of an image, and anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000 just for an archive image, because it never improved that business model. So it's nuts. It's expensive. So, I hope the government does make this public, because it could be a game changer for the SAR community. It could be a huge business change for them.
Yeah.
Drop the prices even. Yeah. Really, really interesting there. So we have one last article here. We've been going pretty long.
This one is just a little fun one to end up on. Just that a father and son pair of researchers discovered the largest geoglyphs anywhere in the world in India. So the picture here shows some basics of the geoglyphs. They're basically just abstract lines. They're decorating a ground in the town of Bohat, India, and they add up to a total distance of 30 miles. So
I'm glad they're showing pictures of these, because when I'm looking at this over top here, because 0 to 40 meters. And obviously I have to look at it a little bit closer because at first glance, I'm like, what are you pointing at here? Are you just pointing at things that look like a road trail in the sand? Did you make this? You make this yourself and call it the world's largest drawing. I don't, but no, but that's not fair. So looks like these pictures is something a lot more complex.
Yeah. And they show on the ground level too. So there's close-ups in the article that show what this actually like from the ground. These lines are approximately about 30 centimeters across. I'm not sure exactly how they're created. I have to look. I'm not seeing in the article exactly how they're created, but they're basically designed, just designed in the ground that are just massive. 30 miles. I mean, that's huge. That for me, that's like having somebody draw a line from here until, I guess like downtown St. Louis from where I am.
So here's the bigger picture of it. This is impressive. Yeah, this is the bigger overview of it. Yeah, that's massive. Each one of these lines. No telling what it actually is supposed to. No, is the article mentioning what it's supposed to represent? Just
one includes like a serpentine line. There's a spiral. There's some straight lines that are kind of coming in. So there's various ones, and they think that they were based. That there's possibly some of the figures. They coincide with some other interesting archaeological artifacts where they've seen figures, memorial stones, monoliths, like different things. So there's a possibility that it has a religious orientation, or that it is possibly somehow figure out exactly what that might be. But whether it's something that was more cultural, but I think they're sort of saying there's a good chance that it's probably some sort of like, theological or otherwise, a nod to the heavens kind of thing. So,
well, I was also it looked like it could have been could be almost agricultural too. Debate the way it could have been, which actually could be,
and it could be both. It could have been something that was like designed to help them understand agricultural patterns or things like that, but also then done as like a way as a nod to the religious belief system at the time. So I think it's just beautiful, interesting thing that it's amazing that we can still discover things based on imagery about the Earth. We tend to take for granted the Earth is a well-documented place, and it is not entirely. So just a fun little article
chat
about
room.
what's still out there.
We're not going to go with the world's biggest dick pic or the oldest dick pic.
Yes, no, definitely not.
We like to give credit.
Yes, that is a very everyone else can look up that geoglyph if they want to look up that one, because that was in the news as well. So that did not pull that
comments
one
by the Peanut Gallery trying to give us some I don't know. Chat room. Okay. Cool. Well, this has been a really productive night. Awesome. And once again, if you had a chance to check out our Clubhouse-like feature in Discord, we appreciate you listening in. Once again, this is Late Night Geo with Courtney Miller and myself, Adam Simmons, on Project Geospatial. And we love doing this every Friday night. We don't have Courtney on every Friday night, but when she is not, or even if she is, you're welcome to join us. So and for those of some of our reoccurring guests with Late Night Geo in the past, like Jeff Pearson, love to having him on reoccurringly, or others. So if you want to come on the show, enjoy talking about geospatial topics, calling me out, Adam, you're wrong on this. That's cool too. We'll have a discussion about major geospatial trends and just have a nice late night Friday discussion. Or it doesn't even have to be Friday. Could be Monday.
Change it up. Just be weird about it. Just change it up. Yeah.
Could be weird about it. In the I'm hitting 11 o'clock and already talking a little goofy. I want to hear
it's just one of those
late
Friday
night
nights.
in St. Louis. you go to bed there early in St. Louis, I guess.
Yes, we do. It's the Midwest.
The Midwest. Yeah. But butter me up.
Yes, yes, indeed. We do enjoy our butter. It's all that animal husbandry. You saw the map. Like there's just
Animal
cows everywhere. Cows, just so many cows.
all the
What are
dairy.
you gonna do with those
move all
cows?
that
You make
milk or
butter.
something.
That's what you do.
Yeah, that's right. Turn it away.
That's right.
Amish paradise. All right. Well, once again, we'll see you guys next Friday. Talk to you later. Wait, we're still live. Yes, we are. Why not? You guys can watch the video in the ending.